Okay, so in this question we had a chart to show UK real GDP in terms of quarterly growth from the years 1982 up to 2013, and we had to assess the validity of some statements. So let's take the first statement, which is the longest run of negative growth periods was 6 quarters. Well, let's look at some of the negative periods. Here we have one negative period, but as we can see there are only 5 quarters, i.e. 5 bars that were negative. Here is another negative period, which again we can see there are only 5 bars and 5 quarters that were negative. So therefore what we're seeing from the whole of this period, the longest negative period that we had only lasted for 5 periods, i.e. 5 quarters. So therefore that contradicts the statement, and therefore the statement is false. The next statement is that if a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, the UK has experienced 3 recessions since 1982. Well, let's take a look at this. First of all, we have this period, which was defined as 1 recession because it had at least 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And then we had this period, which is also defined as a recession because, again, we had at least 2 consecutive periods of negative growth. But as you can see, there is no other period within this chart in which there are 2 red bars in a row, i.e. 2 quarters of negative growth. So therefore, because technically, according to this definition, we've only suffered 2 recessions throughout this time, this contradicts the statement and it is therefore false. Next statement is following the financial crisis in 2008, the UK experienced 5 successive quarters of negative real GDP growth. So we want to focus on the period from the financial crisis and beyond, which is at 2008. So let's draw the threshold line there. And immediately did we suffer from 5 consecutive periods of negative growth, where you can see there are 5 bars in a row that are red and therefore below the 0% growth axis and therefore are negative. So therefore we can say that we did suffer 5 successive quarters of negative growth from 2008 because of the financial crisis. As a result, this statement is true because this supports the statement. And finally, a far greater number of periods experienced negative growth as opposed to positive growth. So this is just seeing whether the amount of positive periods we have were offset by the amount of negative periods we had. So let's first of all consider the negative periods. Any period that is below 0% of growth and therefore is a period defined by a red bar, we can class as being negative growth. Now if we count them up individually, there are 15 bars that are red and therefore 15 periods of negative growth out of the whole period. But if we compare this to positive growth periods, and you can probably see through the human eye that there are far more blue bars than there are red bars, and actually there are 104 periods of positive growth if you add them up, which indicates that the positive growth periods overwhelm the negative growth periods, and therefore this contradicts the statement and this gives us a false answer. So those are the correct answers.